I used to think ELENA GILBERT was everything I wanted to be. Beautiful, loved, the center of everyone's universe. Two vampire brothers fighting over her, willing to die for her, to kill for her. It seemed like the ultimate romantic fantasy. But after years of reflection and countless rewatches, I realized something disturbing. ELENA GILBERT wasn't a strong female character. She was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, dressed up as true love. She taught an entire generation that being helpless is romantic, that dependency is love, and that your worth is measured by how desperately men need to save you. ELENA GILBERT was saved 847 times across 8 seasons of The Vampire Diaries. 847 times. That's not love. That's not romance. That's addiction. An addiction to being rescued, to being the damsel, to never having to face the terrifying reality of standing on your own 2 feet. And millions of young women watched her do it, thinking this was what love looked like. Let me tell you how ELENA GILBERT became the most dangerous role model in modern television, and how she turned an entire generation into professional victims. When we first meet ELENA GILBERT, she appears to be grieving the tragic loss of her parents. She's vulnerable, broken, but seemingly resilient. The perfect setup for a strong character arc about healing and growth. But that growth never comes. Instead, ELENA discovers that vulnerability is power. That being in danger means being important. That needing to be saved means being loved. Within the first few episodes, we see the pattern emerge. ELENA doesn't just stumble into danger, she actively seeks it out. She goes to parties she knows are dangerous. She walks alone in places she knows she shouldn't. She makes choices that any rational person would recognize as monumentally stupid. But here's the thing, ELENA isn't stupid. She's strategic. Every dangerous situation she creates serves a purpose. It forces someone to care about her, to prioritize her, to prove their love through action. Take the very first supernatural encounter. ELENA could have stayed home that night. She could have listened to Bonnie's warnings, to her brother's concerns, to her own instincts. But she didn't. Because staying safe meant staying invisible. And ELENA GILBERT was addicted to being seen, being saved, being the center of everyone's crisis. This is where the show gets truly insidious. It presents ELENA's reckless behavior as bravery. Her inability to stay out of dangerous situations is framed as loyalty, as love, as heroism. But when you strip away the romantic music and the dramatic lighting, what you're left with is a pattern of deliberate self-endangerment designed to manipulate the emotions and actions of others. The writers didn't create a strong female character who occasionally needed help. They created an emotional vampire who fed off the panic, desperation, and heroic gestures of everyone around her. And they made it look like the greatest love story ever told. ELENA's relationship with Stefan begins with him literally saving her from drowning. Not metaphorically, literally pulling her from a car at the bottom of a lake. Their entire relationship is built on this foundation of rescue and vulnerability. Stefan doesn't fall in love with ELENA's strength, her intelligence, or her independence. He falls in love with her need to be saved. And ELENA doesn't fall in love with Stefan's kindness or his values. She falls in love with the feeling of being saved. This sets up the most toxic relationship dynamic imaginable, disguised as epic romance. ELENA learns that to keep Stefan's attention, she must continue to need saving. And Stefan learns that his value in the relationship is entirely dependent on ELENA's vulnerability. Neither of them can grow because growth would threaten the foundation of their connection. Watch how ELENA behaves when things are calm, when she's safe, when no one needs to rescue her. She becomes restless, unhappy, almost depressed. She picks fights, makes dangerous choices, pushes boundaries until someone has to step in and save her again. This isn't character flaw. This is learned behavior. ELENA has discovered that being saved feels like being loved, and she's willing to put herself and others in danger to experience that feeling over and over again. The show presents this as passion, as intensity, as true love. But in reality, it's the cycle of codependency playing out on screen, teaching millions of viewers that healthy relationships are boring and toxic ones are romantic. Consider ELENA's approach to dating a vampire. Any reasonable person would establish boundaries, learn self-defense, develop strategies for staying safe in this dangerous new world. ELENA does none of these things. Instead, she doubles down on vulnerability. She insists on being included in every dangerous supernatural situation, not because she can help, but because being excluded would mean being safe, and being safe would mean being irrelevant. ELENA transforms every supernatural crisis into a personal crisis requiring her rescue. When Catherine threatens the town, ELENA makes herself the target. When Klaus arrives seeking revenge, ELENA offers herself as bait. When the original family creates chaos, ELENA positions herself at the center of the storm. She doesn't do this out of bravery or selflessness. She does it because she's learned that being in danger is the most reliable way to feel important and loved. The pattern becomes so predictable that other characters start planning around it. They know ELENA will find a way to insert herself into every crisis. They know she'll make choices that increase rather than decrease the danger to herself and others. And instead of addressing this destructive pattern, they enable it by constantly rushing to her rescue. By season 2, ELENA has perfected the art of professional victimhood. She's not just accidentally ending up in dangerous situations anymore. She's actively creating them, orchestrating elaborate scenarios where someone, preferably multiple people, will have to choose between saving her and saving themselves. And she always wins because who could possibly choose to let ELENA GILBERT die? The sacrifice play becomes her signature move. ELENA puts herself in situations where saving her requires enormous personal cost from others, then frames her acceptance of that sacrifice as selflessness. She's not being selfish by requiring constant rescue, she's being brave by accepting it. She's not manipulating people into proving their love, she's giving them opportunities to be heroes. This is where ELENA's character becomes truly dangerous as a role model. She teaches young women that their value lies in being irreplaceable to others, not in being complete on their own. That the depth of someone's love can be measured by their willingness to suffer for you. That a relationship isn't real unless someone is constantly sacrificing something significant to maintain it. 847 rescues across 8 seasons. That's more than 100 rescues per season, roughly 2 rescues per episode. ELENA GILBERT spent every single day of her fictional life in a state of crisis requiring intervention from others. And she never, not once, questioned whether this might be a problem. The most telling moment comes in season 3, when ELENA has a chance to become a vampire and gain the power to protect herself. The show frames this as a terrible fate, something to be avoided at all costs. But why? Because if ELENA became powerful, if she could save herself, the entire dynamic that defines her relationships would disappear. Stefan and Damon would have to find new ways to express their love. ELENA would have to find new ways to feel valuable. The show rejects this possibility because it would require actual character growth. Instead, ELENA fights desperately to remain human, to remain vulnerable, to remain in need of constant protection. She frames this as preserving her humanity, but what she's really preserving is her position as the eternal damsel. She's so addicted to being saved that she'll fight to stay helpless. This is the point where ELENA's character crosses from problematic into truly toxic. She's not just failing to grow, she's actively resisting growth. She's not just accepting help, she's engineering situations where help is required. She's not just in love with Stefan and Damon, she's in love with their desperation to save her. The show reinforces this toxicity by presenting ELENA's resistance to becoming powerful as noble and pure. Vampirism is treated as corruption, as loss of humanity, as something that would fundamentally change who ELENA is. But what it would really change is ELENA's relationship to power and vulnerability. She would no longer need constant protection. She would no longer be able to use helplessness as a tool for emotional manipulation. She would have to find new ways to connect with others that didn't involve putting herself in mortal danger. ELENA's fear of vampirism isn't really about losing her humanity. It's about losing her primary strategy for maintaining relationships and feeling valuable. Without the constant cycle of crisis and rescue, ELENA would have to develop actual personality traits, actual skills, actual reasons for people to love her beyond their desperation to save her. Then comes Damon Salvatore, and ELENA discovers that her addiction can escalate. If being saved by the good brother feels like love, how much more intense would it feel to be saved by the bad brother? If Stefan's gentle rescues feel romantic, how intoxicating would Damon's violent interventions feel? ELENA begins the most toxic love triangle in television history, not because she's torn between 2 men, but because she's addicted to the feeling of being worth fighting for. The triangle isn't about choosing between Stefan and Damon. It's about maximizing the amount of rescue, protection, and desperate devotion she can generate. Watch how ELENA behaves during the love triangle. She never chooses one brother and commits. She keeps both of them in a state of constant uncertainty, constantly competing for the privilege of saving her. She creates situations where both brothers have to prove their love through increasingly extreme acts of heroism and sacrifice. The show presents this as ELENA being conflicted about her feelings. But look at her behavior patterns. ELENA is most happy, most energized, most alive when both brothers are desperately trying to win her. When Stefan steps back, she creates a crisis that pulls him back in. When Damon gets too comfortable, she does something that forces him to fight for her again. ELENA GILBERT turns love into a competitive sport where the prize is the right to suffer for her, and she keeps changing the rules to make sure the competition never ends. The triangle becomes a perfect metaphor for ELENA's entire approach to relationships. She doesn't want to be with one person who loves her consistently and healthily. She wants multiple people competing for the chance to sacrifice themselves for her. She doesn't want stable love, she wants desperate love. She doesn't want partnership, she wants worship. And the brothers play right into it. Stefan and Damon both derive their sense of worth from their ability to save ELENA. Neither of them questions whether constantly rescuing the same person might indicate a deeper problem. Neither of them considers that a relationship requiring constant crisis intervention might not be healthy. They both become addicted to being needed, just as ELENA becomes addicted to needing. This creates a toxic ecosystem where everyone's worst impulses are reinforced. ELENA's need to be saved is validated by the brothers' need to save. The brothers' codependent tendencies are validated by ELENA's manufactured helplessness. No one grows, no one heals, no one develops healthier patterns because the dysfunction serves everyone's immediate emotional needs. The show presents this dynamic as the ultimate love story, but it's actually a masterclass in how codependency destroys everyone involved. Stefan loses his identity outside of ELENA-related crisis management. Damon becomes increasingly violent and possessive as he tries to prove he can save ELENA better than his brother. And ELENA becomes more and more helpless as she realizes that independence threatens the foundation of both relationships. This is where the show's influence becomes truly dangerous. Millions of young women watched ELENA GILBERT and learned that love looks like desperation. That a man who isn't willing to die for you doesn't really love you. That if your relationship is stable and healthy, something is wrong. That you should be the most important thing in your partner's life, more important than their own well-being, their own goals, their own existence. The ELENA GILBERT model of romance teaches women to create drama to test love, to view their partner's independence as a threat, to measure their worth by their partner's willingness to sacrifice. And it teaches men that love requires constant rescue, that a woman who doesn't need saving isn't worth having, that their value as a partner depends on their willingness to destroy themselves for someone else. These aren't romantic ideals. These are the building blocks of codependent, toxic relationships. But the Vampire Diaries wrapped them in supernatural fantasy and epic music and convinced an entire generation that this was what true love looked like. The most insidious part of ELENA's character is how the show handles her moments of apparent strength. Occasionally, ELENA will make a decision or take an action that seems independent and powerful. But watch what happens next. Within episodes, sometimes within the same episode, that moment of strength creates a situation requiring rescue. ELENA's independence is always temporary, always leading back to vulnerability and the need for salvation. The message is clear. Women can be strong but only momentarily. Real strength, lasting strength, is dangerous because it threatens the romantic dynamic. ELENA can save herself once in a while, as long as that act of self-rescue creates an even bigger crisis for someone else to solve. This creates what I call the fake empowerment trap. ELENA appears to be an active character making choices, but every choice leads back to the same place. Helplessness. Dependency. The need for rescue. She's running in circles, creating the illusion of agency while maintaining the reality of eternal victimhood. Consider how ELENA handles information and secrets. A strong character would use knowledge as power, would make informed decisions, would take control of their own destiny. ELENA does the opposite. Every time she learns something important, she immediately puts herself in a position where others have to use that information to save her. She transforms knowledge into vulnerability, turning every revelation into another opportunity for rescue. By season 4, ELENA's addiction to being saved has consumed everyone around her. Stefan has built his entire identity around protecting her. Damon has become obsessed with proving he can save her better than his brother. Jeremy, her brother, exists primarily as another person who needs to rescue ELENA or be rescued by ELENA. Even her friendships with Caroline and Bonnie revolve around protection, salvation, and crisis management. ELENA GILBERT hasn't just failed to grow as a person. She's created a reality where no one around her can grow either, because everyone's primary function is ELENA-related crisis management. But the show presents this as ELENA being incredibly loved, incredibly special, incredibly important. Look how many people care about her. Look how far they'll go to protect her. Look how lost they'd be without her. This isn't love. This is emotional hostage-taking. ELENA has made herself so central to everyone's crisis that removing her would collapse their entire world. And she knows it. Elena knows that her safety net isn't just about being saved, it's about being irreplaceable. She's not just addicted to rescue, she's addicted to being irreplaceable. The moment she becomes dispensable, the moment people can survive without her, her entire identity crumbles. This is why Elena can never truly be saved. Every rescue is temporary because being permanently safe would mean being permanently ordinary. And Elena Gilbert would rather be in constant danger than risk being forgotten. The supporting characters become trapped in Elena's gravitational pull. Caroline Forbes, who could have been a strong independent character, spends most of her screen time worrying about Elena, protecting Elena, or cleaning up Elena's messes. Bonnie Bennett, one of the most powerful witches in the show's universe, repeatedly sacrifices her own safety and magical strength to save Elena from consequences of her own choices. Even the villains of the show become obsessed with Elena, not because she's particularly threatening or powerful, but because she's learned to make herself the center of every supernatural conflict. Catherine Pierce, Klaus Michelson, the originals, even minor antagonists end up defining their goals in relation to Elena Gilbert. She doesn't defeat them through strength or cunning. She defeats them by making their obsession with her more destructive than their original plans. This teaches viewers that the way to handle conflict is not through growth, skill development, or strategic thinking, but through making yourself so central to the drama that everyone else's life revolves around managing your crisis. It's a profoundly narcissistic worldview disguised as romantic devotion. The turning point comes in Season 6, when Elena has the opportunity to make the ultimate choice. She can become truly independent, truly powerful, truly capable of saving herself. Or she can make the ultimate sacrifice that ensures she'll never have to be responsible for her own life again. The show frames Elena's choice to have her memories erased as a selfless act of love. She's giving up her happiness so everyone else can be safe. But look deeper. Elena isn't sacrificing herself for others. She's finding the perfect escape from the terrifying prospect of growing up. Memory erasure means Elena never has to face the consequences of her choices. Never has to learn from her mistakes. Never has to develop the skills needed to protect herself. She gets to remain forever young, forever innocent, forever in need of others to make the hard decisions. The ultimate sacrifice is actually the ultimate avoidance. Elena chooses eternal adolescence over adult responsibility, eternal vulnerability over earned strength, eternal dependence over terrifying independence. And the show presents this as romantic, as heroic, as the perfect ending to a great love story. Elena gets to sleep until everyone else has solved all the problems she helped create. She gets to wake up to a world where other people have paid the price for her choices, where she can start fresh without having to learn or grow or change. This is the final message of Elena Gilbert's character arc. When faced with the choice between growth and regression, between independence and dependence, between taking responsibility and avoiding it, choose avoidance. Choose to remain the eternal damsel. Choose to let other people live your life for you. The memory wipe represents the ultimate expression of Elena's core philosophy. Why deal with difficult emotions, complex relationships, or personal growth when you can simply erase the parts of your life that require maturity and responsibility? Why face the consequences of your actions when you can wake up fresh and clean, with someone else having handled all the messy details? Even in her final act, Elena manages to make her choice everyone else's burden. Damon has to live with loving someone who doesn't remember him. Stefan has to carry the weight of all their shared experiences alone. Her friends have to watch her live a lie while they remember the truth. Elena's escape from responsibility becomes everyone else's cross to bear. But here's what the show doesn't tell you about the Elena Gilbert model of love and life. In the real world, professional victims don't get epic love stories. They get exhausted partners who eventually burn out from constant crisis management. They get friends who grow tired of always being in emergency mode. They get families who love them but can't save them from themselves. In the real world, people who refuse to grow, who resist independence, who are addicted to being saved, don't end up with devoted vampires willing to die for them. They end up isolated because healthy people eventually learn that you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Elena Gilbert taught millions of young women that their worth was determined by others' willingness to suffer for them. That love should feel like desperation. That independence was something to fear rather than something to embrace. That being strong meant being alone, and being vulnerable meant being loved. These lessons have played out in real relationships across an entire generation. Women who learned from Elena that testing love through crisis was normal. That emotional manipulation was romantic. That their partner's independence was a threat to the relationship. That they should be the center of their partner's universe, more important than career, family, personal growth, or individual identity. And men who learned that love required constant rescue, constant vigilance, constant sacrifice. That a woman who could take care of herself wasn't worth having. That their value as partners was measured by their willingness to drop everything for their girlfriend's latest crisis. The ELENA GILBERT model has created countless toxic relationships, countless codependent partnerships, countless people who confuse intensity with love, drama with passion, and dependence with devotion. But perhaps most tragically, ELENA GILBERT taught women to fear their own strength. Every time ELENA had an opportunity to become powerful, the show presented it as a loss, a tragedy, something to be avoided. The message was clear. Female strength is dangerous not just to others but to love itself. A strong woman, according to the Vampire Diaries, is fundamentally unlovable. She doesn't need rescue, which means she can't offer men the opportunity to be heroes. She doesn't create crisis, which means relationships with her might be stable but boring. She doesn't need others to define her worth, which means she might actually leave if treated poorly. ELENA GILBERT's greatest crime wasn't just teaching women to be professional victims. It was teaching them to fear the alternative. To see independence as isolation, strength as loneliness, growth as loss. The show reinforced these toxic messages through its treatment of other female characters. Caroline Forbes becomes more likable as she becomes more supportive of ELENA's dysfunction. Bonnie Bennett is most valued when she's sacrificing her own power for ELENA's benefit. Catherine Pierce, the strong independent version of ELENA, is consistently portrayed as evil, selfish, and ultimately lonely. The message is crystal clear. Women who prioritize themselves, who refuse to make others' needs more important than their own, who won't sacrifice their power for someone else's comfort, are the villains of the story. Women who enable, support, and sacrifice for others, especially for ELENA, are the heroes. This creates a hierarchy of female worth based entirely on willingness to serve ELENA's emotional needs. The better friend you are to ELENA, the more supportive of her dysfunction, the more willing to drop your own life for her crisis, the more virtuous you are as a woman. It's a profoundly anti-feminist message wrapped in the language of friendship and loyalty. ELENA GILBERT doesn't just model toxic romantic relationships, she models toxic female friendships where one person's needs constantly eclipse everyone else's, and this imbalance is presented as normal, even admirable. So here's what I want to tell everyone who grew up thinking ELENA GILBERT was relationship goals. She wasn't. ELENA GILBERT was a cautionary tale about what happens when you confuse being needed with being loved, when you mistake drama for passion, when you fear your own power so much that you choose eternal helplessness instead. Real love doesn't require constant crisis. Real strength doesn't threaten love, it enhances it. Real growth doesn't mean losing the people who matter, it means attracting people who celebrate your independence rather than feeding off your vulnerability. ELENA GILBERT was never the heroine of her own story. She was the eternal damsel, forever waiting for someone else to write her happy ending. But you don't have to be ELENA GILBERT. You can choose to be the heroine of your own story. You can choose growth over stagnation, independence over dependence, strength over eternal vulnerability. You can choose to save yourself not because no one else will, but because you're worth saving. And you're worth more than a love that requires you to stay broken to maintain it. ELENA GILBERT taught us what love looks like when it's built on need, desperation, and the fear of abandonment. But real love, healthy love, sustainable love looks different. It looks like two whole people choosing each other not because they need to be saved, but because they want to grow together. It looks like partners who encourage each other's strength, who celebrate each other's independence, who see each other's growth as a gift rather than a threat. It looks like relationships that get stronger during peaceful times, not just during crisis. It looks like people who love themselves enough to demand better than the ELENA GILBERT model of romance. The Vampire Diaries ended years ago, but ELENA GILBERT's influence continues. Every time someone creates drama to test their partner's love, every time someone fears their own independence, every time someone confuses being needed with being loved, ELENA GILBERT's toxic legacy lives on. But we can choose differently. We can recognize that the eternal damsel isn't a romantic ideal, she's a prison. A prison built from fear of growth, fear of strength, fear of standing alone even temporarily. We can choose to break the cycle that ELENA GILBERT represents. We can choose relationships built on mutual respect rather than mutual rescue. We can choose partners who love our strength, not our weakness. We can choose to be complete people seeking companionship, not broken people seeking salvation. ELENA GILBERT may have been addicted to being saved, but you don't have to be. You can save yourself. And that's not just more empowering than the ELENA GILBERT model of love. It's also more romantic. Because there's nothing more attractive than someone who knows their own worth, who doesn't need constant validation, who chooses love from a place of strength rather than desperation. Elena Gilbert taught us what not to do. Now it's time to learn what healthy love actually looks like. And trust me, it's so much better than 847 rescues. It's one choice made every day by two people who are strong enough to stand alone but choose to stand together. That's the love story Elena Gilbert never got to have. But it's the love story you deserve.